everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews bonus footage. I am Jillian Robinson, the associate producer here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre, and I am joined by the brilliant Ryan Borochovitz, one of our artistic producers. Hello, Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well. Long time no speak.
Long time no speak. So, Ryan, let's just let our viewers and listeners know we are doing something a little bit different. So, if you've listened to our Dinner is Served duet review episode, you're probably wondering, why are we here talking about that again? Or if you watched on YouTube, why am I looking at them wearing the exact same outfits? Well, what Ryan and I decided to do is record some bonus in-depth spoiler footage for you all, because this piece was so juicy and so immaculate, and we really did want to kind of go map out what our individual journeys were in this show. So you're probably watching and listening to this way after the fact that the production is closed. But yeah, we want to shout out these phenomenal artists and really get into the meat and potatoes, very 60s North American cuisine specific, of what Dinner is Served was for us. So again, this is a bonus sort of spoiler experience episode of Dinner is Served by Toes for Dance. It was an immersive dance theater experience that happened at the Campbell House Museum here in Toronto. It was choreographed and directed by Kristen Carcone, and Ross Wirtanen and Clinton Edward were the associate choreographers and directors. And let's do it.
I would ask you what's in your cup, but we are recording this immediately after we ended last. My mug is empty. I finished it during the last recording, but you said stay hydrated in the sign-off of the other episode, so I do have my bottle of water here for that purpose.
I also have some water, which also I feel like we both have flowery patterns on our bottles.
Isn't that fun? We wore little flowers as we walked through this immersive experience, so it's on theme.
Amazing. Look at that. Didn't even know.
So I guess
speaking of didn't even know, we don't know what show we both saw.
Yeah, well, so we're gonna, even though the run has ended by this point, we're gonna put the spoiler maple cookie on the screen right now, just in case this happens to get extended or tour somewhere and people do get to see this later. Everything we say in this episode is spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. We did light spoilers in the last one, but this is where we really dig into it.
Full fat spoilers.
Okay, so we had completely different experiences. As we said in that other episode, you were following the character of the host, and I was following the character of his secretary, his referring to the favorite. Mm-hmm. Very confusing. I'm just going to call her the secretary because that's simpler. But so I guess you want to walk through your entire scene by scene, what you saw. And then I will do the same, and we'll see if together we can piece what the actual full story of this was. Yeah.
So again, the start of the experience, anybody who came to see the show, they were paired up with one of the 8 main characters. There was a 10-fold cast, but 8 main characters. And so the character I was attached to was the host. And so that was my initial instruction: follow the host, go where they go. They might ask you to do something or hold something. You can either accept or decline. So the host took us out of the parlor space, the sort of introductory space that everyone was in at the start. And we walked all the way to the main level, just to the left of the main foyer. And it was like a front bedroom. And the actor playing the host was Rodney DeVarius. And Rodney, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. They were astonishing. I just want to start, and I shared this on our other episode, their acting and precision when it came to the giddiness and need to burst out loud and feel, paired with the sort of drudged, very melancholic depression and feeling outside of their skinnedness that their character was experiencing. Thank you, Rodney, for just displaying such humanity in exploring both of those sides. So in this first room, the host did a solo piece. So there was 2 songs that I remember playing prominently. One of them was Feeling Good, and the other one, like, I'm feeling good, that song. And then Ain't No Sunshine, I believe that was the other one. And there was 2 mirrors in the space, and the host was obsessed with what they looked like and how, like playing fidgeting with their clothes. They actually took off the dress coat and took off the vest and was just kind of like playfully feeling themselves with like their hat and everything. And then they would sort of like stop explosive dancing, and you could tell there was something bothering them or they were sad. They would make awesome use of the bed, like flopping onto the bed or like jumping onto the bed and spiraling themselves off. They did really fun, like they went in the closet at one point and did really fun, like hand.
Is this symbolism of some kind going into the closet?
Yeah.
Based on some
what we're
things I
gonna
saw
get
this
to.
character do out the window, but
Yes. And so there was like playful clown hands. So again, there was this jovialness that you could tell was inside this character, and this like totally like vivacious life that wanted to explode. But then right when we left the room, everything came back to, that's not the person I can be. I have to put on my vest. And they actually had each of us help put on the vest. There was a real coy way. They had their sport coat and was going to give it to the same person who put on the vest, but then just kept walking and walking and walking. And then at the very last of us allowed them. So they were kind of like flirting with who's going to get to put my coat on.
Nice.
But then just was so sad. Like, again, it was like, I just wanted to give this character a hug. I was like, you have something going on. And at this time, I had no idea what was going on. It really was just, I knew that it was a human who, again, things that peppered in my brain was like depression, anxiety, feeling outside of your skin for some reason. There wasn't any like through plot yet. This was just the entryway into who this character was. And so I left that room being like, this character is not who they want to be in real life. And let's keep unpacking. So we then moved into the room across the hall, which was set up kind of like a small dining space. So there was a table with 2 chairs. And the guests of the host, me and the people who were following the host, were brought into the room. And then in came the hostess and all of her guests. Excuse me. So then the host and the hostess did a duet. And I mentioned this on the last episode a little bit, but wow, these 2 painted the picture of like a couple that has to be together during this time, this era, has to put on the facade of we are the host and the hostess. But then through like childlike mocking movements, again, paired with the weight of what both of these people had going on, was just put into this like blender of like masterful duet. And the entire time they were like locking eyes with each other, and each of them knew each other. It's like they knew each other's secrets. They knew each other's unhappiness, and they wanted to kind of tip the other one over, but they also knew that they had to hold each other up. And there was a beautiful piece of, many in this duet, but where the hostess actually goes on the table and fully leans her body like diagonally, almost like a clock, on him, and he's walking her around the table.
Oh, cool.
And then there was another moment where he picked her up and was holding her, like lugging her on his back. So there were so many things to unpack there of like, oh, I have this burden of something I don't want to be carrying, but also I have to lift her up, and her just like flitting around on his shoulders, happy, kind of half sad. And then she was like waving to us, and then all of a sudden she was like transfixed by the engagement ring on her finger and was like, oh, like it was just this like, and then when she would get too mocky to him in his movements, he would very much like remind her that I am the man in this relationship and you will behave and you will do this. And so there was moments of her like being like, oh, right. Like know my place. Like it was just these like fiery humans that wanted to burst out of this relationship, go their own ways or find happiness, but know that they can't. So it's like they were each other's best friends, but also enemies at the same time. There was also a waltz moment where, again, I was like, wow, what am I watching? It was the two bodies like getting ready and like arm framed with each other. But instead of holding like shoulder and hands, the hostess was holding the elbow of the host and his arm. And I think he was, yeah, like holding her waist like usual. But I was like, wow, what does this mean of like people who aren't, a couple things pop in mind, like aren't necessarily kismet or their chemistry lacks. So like the image of the waltz isn't beautiful. It's actually quite distorted and grotesque. It's like their hands aren't meant to mold into each other. But then also like her holding his hand, right? And like the symbolism of like men back in that day and age and like violence. And this isn't to say I don't think the host character necessarily was violent, but just that imagery of like male versus female in that time and like this picture perfect postured dance with the woman holding the fulcrum of the hand of the house, the hand that can decide, right? It just was like this, wow, so many images fluttering through my brain. Speaking of fluttering, eventually the hostess exited the space and our host was just sitting in the chair. Again, I found this a lot with this character of the host is there would be the dance of whatever scene or room we're brought into. And then almost at the end of every one, we were brought into this somber, like, I don't want to be here. What I'm doing is wrong and what have you, which is just like a lovely layer. So then the host goes to leave and he goes outside. And so I'm like, oh, this is neat. We're going to go outside. And I was the first one right near him, the host. And they turned back and just put their hand out to me. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to go. And then all of a sudden, the matriarch, I turn around, the matriarch says, my guests and the host's guests, please come into this space. So we re-entered the dining space. And the lady in red was already in there. So it was the lady in red, all of her guests, the matriarch, all of her guests, and then us, the host guests. And the lady in red, basically the matriarch put us in there and then was kind of hovering by the door. And the lady in red was doing this like explosive, think of like lady in a nightclub. She had fishnet stockings with her legs were fanning everywhere. She had like a cigarette in her bra. It was just like an explosiveness. And it was to whatever Lola wants. And she grabbed like the crystal, what is that called again with the alcohol?
Is it like a glass? What?
No, like the crystal canister of alcohol. Okay, there's a name for it.
I don't know. I'm not a big.
Yeah, and grabbed a glass and she actually like gave me the canister to hold and another guest the glass while she just kept dancing and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll hold this for you. And then the matriarch shows up and kind of this is like the lady in red like took her shoes off and she's like in the space and the matriarch picks up her shoe from behind and places it on her lap. And then the lady in red's like, okie dokie, maybe I shouldn't be doing this in here. But then you think maybe it's going to be like the matriarch trying to like remind her where she is. But actually it's the matriarch who comes in and is like, ha ha ha, I can tango this tango too. And they actually like dance the same dance moves with each other. And then you see, I'm just pulling up the actor playing our matriarch, Fanny Gorieb. Fanny, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. But just transform into like this, maybe she was a youthful club dancer herself and like was fanning her legs around and like put her leg on the table and like they were like mirroring each other's dance moves. And it just was like this like power and infusion of like women. And yeah, it was just like so lovely. And by the end of the dance, they were doing the exact same dance moves and cheering each other on kind of thing. But then again, tonal shift. The lady in red comes up to the window and it's like, what am I looking at? And then so does the matriarch. So at first I'm like, okay, I don't know if like we're supposed to look. But then by the time both characters were pulling all of their attention on the window, all of us started turning around and looking as well. And what do you know? It was the host who was out in the courtyard with the other man. And shall I call the other man the host's lover? And I was like, oh. And they were kind of like apart. And then they started like dancing together like lovers. There was some lovely like intimate moments of like pushing each other up against like the cement columns or like on the grass. And it was just this like like lovely partnership of like, yes, these two are together on another level than what we just saw of host and hostess. And yeah, it was astonishing. And as I mentioned in the other episode, the soundtrack for that dance that was happening outside with the windows closed and the door closed, the song was playing in our red room. So I'm like, these actors, like, do they have it playing outside too? Or did they like
maybe an earpiece of some
and
kind?
I'm like, I was like, this is magic. This is just astonishing. So their flirtatious dance kind of ends with the host kind of giving a kiss to the other man's head, but then walking away and almost being like, this is, I got to go back to my like everyday life. We can't do this. And so the host comes back into the space, into the foyer, and we get kind of reunited with him again. And he takes us with the matriarch, actually. So the matriarch kind of brings her guests and the host guests into the foyer and looks at the host. And in that moment, I'm like, oh, that's your mom. Okay. At that point, we just knew her as the matriarch. So I'm like, that's the host's mom. And she goes upstairs and beckons him, but brings her guests with her first. And then the host brings us up to follow. And they go into another bedroom in the second level of the house. And what ensues is a duo dance between mother and son. And I don't remember the exact song, but the lyrics, at this section of my track, I very much was like, the choreography was paired beautifully with the literal lyrics. Like the movements that Fanny was doing was exactly what we were hearing in the track. But it was basically like mother loves you and like mother knows best and you know what you're not supposed to do kind of thing. And so basically what she does is she puts on like a veil over her head and like approaches him kind of in a kind motherly manner. But then she grabs a necklace that has a crucifix at the bottom of it and like dangles that in his face. And then she goes at some point of the dance and grabs a Bible and gives that to him. So again, without using actual words, basically saying to her son, remember yourself. This is sinful. You are a man, you have a wife, I am your mother, I love you, but banish. And oh my gosh, there's choreography where like she raised up her arms and then like swept them down, like almost like she was trying to summon the like homosexuality out of her son. And then he kind of adopted that, but like would sort of go away from that and just pushing and pulling of what was being the religious values being tossed at him, literally with the Bible and the necklace. And again, there was this lovely moment of leaning. The host picks up the matriarch and just like trudges her in the space. And then there's a moment where the host is just standing there and about to fall, and the mom's like picking them up and trying to like turn them around to a next direction, but then they're falling again. And then so it's just this like talk about again miscommunication and like no movement, no words are going to sort of fix him. And then the matriarch ends up leaving and we follow the host again, and we go all the way down to that parlor space that we started the experience at. But this time it's set up kind of like what I thought what would be, again, like a speakeasy or like a house that was for like homosexuals or a place of expression. And I think the fact that we got to go like into the basement of a space was kind of had that feel as well. And so there was,
Descending into the underworld.
yeah, exactly. There was music playing, and we actually were beckoned and welcomed by the lady in red who was dancing her way around the space. And who we see now is the other man who is wearing their blazer, but now a pink cocktail dress and had a full face of makeup and earrings. So it almost was like the lady in red and or the other man were inviting the host to come into a space where you can express yourself, be you, we love you. And there was such a camaraderie and a companionship between these three. And the beginning of the piece is like the lady in red and the other man trying to kind of loosen up the host and get him to dance. And again, the lyrics of the song in the first one was about like Romeo and Juliet. And it was like lovely. It like started with the lady in red kind of dancing with the other man. And then things switched where the other man was like the Juliet to the host's Romeo. And then things switched again where the host is standing on like this bench and the lady in red ties like a blanket around him. So now the host kind of adopts like a female persona. It was just like the subversion of gender and like just, yeah, fun space of these friends just like throwing every sort of societal like norm and pressure out the window. And then,
So before you move on too much, because I just want to comment on that, because my group, we passed by the other man's group several times in the hall. So at one point I noticed that, oh, they're wearing a dress underneath the blazer. I wonder what the story with that is. And then obviously they were still wearing that at the end when we all converge on dinner. But I was wondering if I was very curious to do this comparison of notes with you to wonder, like, when did that happen that they change into the dress? Is there like they have their own group that's following them? So I imagine that there is a story behind that. But you also weren't privy to that. You got to see the payoff of this costume change, but not the actual process by which it came about narratively.
Yeah, because we showed up to this like speakeasy club, and the other man was actually like sitting there with like a hunched down and like hands on their laps, being like, "I'm waiting for you," kind of thing. And then the three of them started. The lady in red took the rotary phone and used it as so Ain't No Mountain High Enough came on, and she used the receiver as like a microphone and was like getting some of like the guests to do it too. And then the other man was using something as well. But then I remember the host bent down. I was like, oh, what is he doing? Unplugged like one of the main lamps that was like used as spotlights at the beginning of the piece, and like totally picked up the body of the lamp and put the lampshade on his head, and then almost had it like a studio mic, like he was singing into the studio mic, and then was doing like fun dance moves with a lampshade on their head. And I was like, okay.
So this is the part, for the record, that in the previous episode you said was really fun and kind of only alluded to obliquely.
Yeah, because then all of a sudden the other man and the lady in red are like perched on the stairs doing like choreographed dance, and then the host just finds themselves in front of that triangle doing the dance with them too. So the three of them are just doing this like synthesized dance together, and then all three of them start grabbing guests and bringing us onto the dance floor. So we were just having a dance party to Ain't No Mountain High Enough, and like singing and snapping and clapping together. And then all of a sudden the chef comes in and goes like this and says like, dinner is served. So then we go into the dinner space, which I say let's talk about the dinner itself after.
Because we all saw the same thing there, but we did notice different things based on the story we'd seen so far. So yeah, we will return to that based on our, now after we compare this knowledge. Okay, so I guess it's my turn. I don't expect my descriptions to be as thick as and rich as yours were. I don't remember all of the songs that played, apologies, but I kind of will do my best to get the main narrative beats. And again, apologies if I miss one, but I think just get the basic track. So right after we have the opening scene that we were all privy to, I was following his secretary, the favorite secretary, played by Christine Flores. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. And she was so fun because she was introduced in that opening bit, very mousy. She like has her glasses on. You kind of expect, there's clearly more to her than meets the eye. But the phrase I want to use is buttoned up, even though she was just wearing a normal green dress that matched our little flower. She wasn't buttoned up by any means, but you could tell right off the bat that there's more to you, that there will be a sort of sexy librarian moment of like, let your hair down and everything's gonna be. And that you didn't have to wait long for that to happen, because the first room we went to was that little sitting room, or sorry, not sitting room, the kind of like small dining room where you had the scene where you looked out the window as well. And we are brought in by the secretary to see a scene that was going on between the favorite and his wife. And we are watching that, and we see them having a bit of a lover's quarrel. They're arguing. She, as we saw in the opening scene, the wife, has been drinking, and she spills some liquid on herself, and the favorite is not having this on his big night, that she's making a fool of herself. He, aggressively takes the glass away from her. And they have this very intricate dance scene that is essentially their quarrel on and around the table, and it's so well done. Like, they're doing a lot of movements and pounding down to punctuate the thoughts, and he's so dismissive of her, he keeps doing this kind of thing that
sorry, the host and the hostess for doing that too.
So clearly the choreographers have a sense of, this is how we semiotically communicate dismissive husbands.
This and
yeah, and the fact that they probably knew that nobody who saw one scene would see the other, so that they could get away with cross-pollinating. So it's fun that we are now comparing this.
But also it's like the same signs, like you're saying, like signage of like this means that. Like
why reinvent a whole different visual grammar of dismissiveness when you have this perfect idea already here. But it was so fun. Again, like I said in the last episode, it was so easy to follow what was happening in the scenes, even though there were no words being used. This wasn't a verbal interaction, but their bodies communicated it so effectively. So they had this scene, and also we spent a lot of time in my track with the wife. She popped in and out of a lot of scenes. The performer who played her is Laura Carella, and she was such a stage presence throughout all of this too. I'll talk more about certain scenes that she came in, but there were several instances where she was looking me right in the eyes, and I felt like she was peering into my soul. She has such an expressive face, and of course, as everyone is, such a talented dancer and actor in all of this, that she definitely deserves a shout out there. But then after we have this lover's quarrel scene, the wife exits, and we're still here with the secretary who guided us into this room and was watching this scene transpire. And then Elvis's Can't Help Falling in Love with You begins to play, as we have the favorite and the secretary alone together. And they do this beautifully choreographed, for lack of a better word, a sex scene. But one that the intimacy direction in this piece, I'll also say, was so well handled by, I have the intimacy director's name here, Lisa Stevens, because the way that they played with movement and distance in this scene, where there was this constant sort of flow of one of them being lying or crawling over the table while the other crawled under it. And visually this I think symbolizes so much of, there's this literal barrier between them, this physical decorum, the structure of the household and entertaining and parties.
And dinner is served, food, the hunger, doing it on a literal table.
Exactly, but the table creating this actual barrier that's preventing them from really getting at each other. But the way that one of them would be underneath and the other would be on top, and you feel like there's physical things actually happening between them, this intimacy that is withheld, but it's just so well handled, and to the tune of the very familiar Elvis number, very much really sold the moment. And then just as they're finishing this, the wife returns into the room and sees the rest of it. So right off the bat, we know that she is aware that this tryst is going on between her husband and his secretary. So then the secretary awkwardly leads us out of the room. We followed her. We don't know what else happens in the room that we leave behind. and we go up to I'll call it the little bedroom. I don't
Yep.
really know whose room it was supposed to be. I know we're in the host and hostess's house.
So I think it was the matriarch. So if it was it with like the burgundy
Yeah, it was kind of like,
bedding?
yeah, actually, I'm struggling to visualize the
Okay.
sheet, but it kind of had like green walls that overlooked that front courtyard and the window, which I'll get to in a moment. How
Okay, yeah.
important that overlooking is, and it had
Oh
like
no,
one.
yeah. I don't think I was in that room. But yeah,
Okay, it had one kind of like just maybe slightly larger than a single bed or like a double bed, but it
okay.
wasn't like a large king or queen size bed that you
Interesting.
might expect the
Cool.
master bedroom to look like.
Right.
And part of me, again, if you recall, I had a slippage in the previous episode where I accidentally said that it was the home of the favorite hosting this
Yes.
party. And part of me in this scene kind of assumed that this was his bedroom with his wife. Part of because of some of the narrative things that'll happen that I'll get to in a moment.
Yeah.
But now I'm rethinking, oh, maybe this is someone else's room and it's different. Or it might very well be the matriarch's room that you're thinking of. Hard to say.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So the secretary sits down at this little table that has jewelry lying on it. Maybe this helps call to mind if you saw this room as well. And she's sitting there and she's like trying on earrings and necklaces. And as we come into this room, depending on where you position yourself, you may have very quickly noticed or very slowly noticed, as I did based on where I was positioned in the room, that the new maid, played by Brie Clark, was hiding behind the bed.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And because she doesn't have an audience of her own that's following her, I don't know if we're supposed to know or surmise, or if some people know why she's there. Maybe there was another scene that was previously that contextualizes that, but we're just watching the secretary trying on these earrings, and at some point you realize, oh, we're not alone in this room. There's somebody else here.
Yeah.
And Bree stood up at one point and slowly walked towards her, and because the secretary's looking in the mirror, she has the moment of, somebody's behind me.
Yeah.
And there's this like pause for a moment, and then they do the thing that you always see in movies where they start laughing and they're actually buddies.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So there was
Yeah.
this like moment of tension of, oh, busted maybe, but no, they're in cahoots. And what we realize through the wonderful dance scene that happens between the two of them, in which they're sharing pieces of jewelry with each other, is that, if I understand it correctly, these two are robbing either the host and hostess. I imagine, because I would say that the new maid is the maid in the host and hostess's house, but it also seems very much that the romantic relationship that we just saw between the secretary and the favorite may also be part of this large ruse and a criminal scheme that the two of them are in on. It's kind of the downstairs people in this class dynamic of this story, that the two of them seem very much on the same page with each other. And the dance that they did between each other was the maid would put like this pearl necklace around the secretary's neck, and they'd kind of like do this like swoopy dance together about how like we are pilfering all of these items, and they would share like large beautiful earrings and put them on each other's ears and share them, pass them back and forth between. So it was very much thick as thieves kind of partners in crime relationship that we saw between them. Then the secretary left the room, similar to what you said the host did when they went outside, and we were not following. We stayed in the room with the new maid and were kind of instructed to look out the window after the new maid did a bit more of a dance with the necklace and the jewelry that was being stolen, presumably being stolen. She starts looking out the window and notices that we see a continued dalliance happening between the favorite and the secretary, perfectly choreographed to the song we were hearing in the room, as you said, which was so good. And this one is much more physically hands-on than the beautiful table dance that we saw in the previous scene, that they are all over each other. They are completely still beautifully choreographed as a dance, but viscerally intimate and no barriers anymore. And I guess this seems to be a recurring motif here in terms of the true sexual energy that can happen in, I guess, like a Hobbesian state of nature that happens outside, or more of a Rousseauian state of nature, because it's like beautiful and they're able to actually be physically intimate with each other in a way that they couldn't in the interior structures of the house.
Right.
But the funny thing about that is we just saw the scene where we realized that, okay, I think there's something a little mischievous going on where the downstairs people might be stealing from these rich folks. And we are watching this outdoor dalliance basically through the eyes of the new maid, because we're watching her. She's the character who directed us, and she's like smirking at this, so it almost feels like this is very much according to the plan.
Oh, yeah.
Distract him with your sex body while we steal all of the jewelry, basically. So that was fun. And yeah, Brie got to do more dancing in the room, kind of like celebratory. We're getting away with this is all going so well. And I forget the exact order, if she left before the secretary returned or if they had another moment together and then the maid left. But then the secretary returned into the room after having this whole, sex scene outside, basically. Oh, and the funny thing about that maybe you noticed this too in the scene that you saw that happened outside, but it's in the middle of this open air courtyard that is only divided from the outside world by this like iron fence.
Yep.
So I could see people on walking on Queen Street watching this happen and just being like, and even though it was beautifully choreographed as a dance, it did kind of just look like people making love to each other. And I wonder what the people walking past thought. Did they realize this was a theater show? They couldn't see an audience because the audience was all inside the house. That it kind of just looked like, wow, these people are really into each other, which I thought was quite funny. So yeah, and I'm sure you had similar thoughts about the scene you saw.
With the host and the other man, yeah.
So then the secretary returns into the room and she is left alone with us. And she's kind of dancing around the room, and part of us, we can't tell, is this dancing about how well the jewelry caper is going, or is it about the physical relations that she just partook in? And she notices that there's a box underneath the bed that she pulls out, and there's this wedding dress in it, which was part of why it was making me think that, oh, this must be the wife's dress. But now thinking about whose house is this, whose room is this, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's the matriarch's wedding dress. Maybe it's the hostess's wedding dress. Part of me still wants to say that it's the wife's dress, but I don't know how maybe that works in this relationship here.
Yeah.
But the secretary, tries on the dress and puts it on. And the funny thing is, in terms of the interactivity, she came up to me and wanted me to like zip her or button up, but I'd never handled a wedding dress before and I couldn't quite figure out which part to take, and she very politely stepped aside and like, sorry, and had somebody else in our little cohort do that, which was very funny. But yeah, silly me and my lack of knowledge of handling wedding dresses. But yeah, so she puts on this wedding dress and she's like very much like living in this moment, and she jumps on the bed and dances around the room, twirls, and then she's kind of starts to break down a bit, and again also wonderfully choreographing the dance, and she looks at herself in the mirror and she does like prayer hands but then forces them away, and it's like a lot of like tug and pull. Like there's like, what I got from the scene is that she's having a crisis of faith of, I have genuine feelings for this person who I'm duping, and I would like to be married to him, maybe. But what am I doing? Like, is this right? Is this wrong? I don't know how I feel. And it was just like such a tormented moment where she really like broke down crying and all of this. And it was like, yeah, chills all over. And then, still wearing the wedding dress, we exited the room, and who do we happen to run into in the hallway outside of the room? Is the wife with her group of people. And she gets a look at the secretary, who she's seen her doing things with her husband, and now she's wearing the wedding dress that I just assumed is her wedding dress. Maybe that's incorrect and hard to say. There was not vocalization to clarify things, but she was furious. And as we quietly tried to go downstairs, she and her group were hot on our tail, following us down the stairs. And we then returned to the room where it all started. All of the furniture had been cleared at this point. The room that you later said looked like a speakeasy.
Yeah.
And in that room, the lady in red was already present there. This was the first time that we'd had any scene with her. She entered in that opening scene arm in arm with the other man, but we don't really know what her deal is. And honestly, I still am not quite confident, even having seen this next scene that I'm about to describe. But she was already in the room as, the secretary led us, and the wife was following very closely behind. And the two of them got into this very, very intense physical altercation. And so
the wife and the secretary?
The wife and the secretary. And the woman in red, or lady in red, was there kind of trying to be a referee, being very much caught in the middle, but there was no stopping the wife from, and remember, she's been drinking a lot at
Right.
this point, so it was, I want to say, sloppy fighting. Like, it wasn't elegant by any means, but of course it
Hmm.
was still done in this dancey way that is
Yeah.
quite visually evocative. But yeah, so as the two of them fighting, the wedding dress came off, the earrings and shoes came off, and they're kind of blows to blows, fisticuffs happening here. And the lady in red trying to intervene, but having a hard time. And there was a lot of, it was just, yeah, very well done. Like, in addition to, I don't know, is there a credited fight director here? Because I'm trying to, it was very, very, just very well done fight choreography, similar to how well done the intimacy direction was. Um, I'll keep describing while you see if you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
that. And then, so after this, like this, there's no winner in this fight. I guess you could say that maybe the wife won or got close to subduing her opponent, but they all just kind of like retreated to separate corners of the room, were completely out of breath, and then they kind of start laughing. Starts with just like very like giggle, and then all three of them are doing it. They're looking at each other. They're making eye contact with us. The wife was sitting on the floor very close to me. And like I said, she has a very strikingly expressive face and was kind of like looking at me a lot, like trying to jolly me into laughing with her. And as they're laughing so hard and so loud, it like builds an intensity. And then before you know it, they're crying. And you couldn't even tell the moment where laughter turned into crying. It's one of those kind of
Yeah.
very, interesting moments. We've seen versions of it before, but it was stunning how we got that transition without
Yeah.
even knowing, as if laughter and tears were identical emotions in this case here. And then we kind of just, I don't think I'm forgetting anything specific in between, but I think that we kind of got up and followed. We got into a group huddle together where everybody kind of just like, okay, let's breathe, we're cool, that got it out of hand. And then we retreated outwards to go further downstairs into the kitchen, or actually maybe
Oh,
we went,
cool.
I actually, was it downstairs, or it had like a real downstairs feel, this little kitchen alcove that we were in, but maybe it was even upstairs from where that room was. The spatiality is escaping me at the moment, but then we had what was probably my favorite scene in the whole piece, which was the kitchen. And in the previous review episode, I described this as calling to mind the steerage from Titanic. These are all of the downstairs characters getting together and kind of having a good time. And after the physically intense couple scenes we've just had,
Yeah.
this was a much needed respite, similar to the scene that you ended on before going to the dinner
Yeah.
of, sexual liberation and freedom. Things are finally like a good, cool vibe. This was just a fun moment where we were with the new maid, the chef, the wife, and of course the secretary who brought my group in there. All four of them sitting around this table, and they handed out spoons to each of us and a napkin. And first I thought, oh, they're going to serve us something to eat. So I put the napkin on my laps. Other people were like tucking it into their shirt like Fred Flintstone. But then we realized that the choreographed dance that they were doing around the table was polishing silverware, and they were encouraging us to.
Wow.
So
oh, that's fun.
So where we thought we might be fed, we are actually, no, you are being put to work to get things ready for dinner. But it's a very fun dance that is quite rhythmic, and we have our napkins, we're polishing these spoons, they're handing them to each other in interesting ways, and then they start getting more into it and more vibrant, and they take out a bottle of some sort of clear alcoholic beverage, and they pour it, and the chef very much makes sure to, let's cut the wife's portion in half because she's maybe had a little too much already. But yeah, they drink, and it becomes very festive, and the chef and the new maid, who we've seen little bits of here, the chef maybe less so, but even during the opening scene we saw they did a little twirl dance together. There's something going on between them, and which gets paid off in the final dinner scene that we'll talk about soon. But the two of them have these amazing, exciting, lively dances together. Like I talked about in the last review, how he lifted her up kind of around where her feet were touching the walls, and then touching, like walking along the ceilings and like this whole
Wow.
flip. It was amazing. Bree's athleticism is just fantastic in terms of being able to
We
do
love
this.
Bree.
Yeah, the Spider-Man dance. Didn't know other way to describe it. Then like they got a broom out and was doing like this interesting dance with a broom, and then got the broom out to do like a limbo, and we were all encouraged to join and to
Oh
do
my
the
gosh,
limbo.
that's awesome.
It was so fun and it is so lively. And then we eventually got the instruction that, okay, it's dinner time. Go, 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 everybody. No more fun. Like, we have work to do. And, we all had to collect our napkins and spoons, put them out there. And it was all time for us to go onward to dinner is served. And this brings us back to the point where we converged to the final scene where everybody's characters brought them into the same dinner space.
Yes.
How should we go about describing this?
So I first want to, now that we've both mapped out our trajectories, the other man, the hostess, the chef, and probably Lady in Red, or we probably didn't see a good chunk of those characters' trajectories.
Mm-hmm. They came into our stories, or some of yours, some of mine.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I feel now hearing everything you said, I was curious to what extent will we have seen the entire story or the bulk of the story between the two of us, and it still feels like there are significant gaps.
Yeah, well, not necessarily significant, but just like, like I think because to me, like even the way they were mapped out at the beginning, like Lady in Red and the other man, like kind of seem like our tertiary main characters, like like in their relationship to like the favorite and the hostess being brother sister. I also wonder if they had a dance at one point or a sibling thing.
Yeah, I guess the interesting thing is when I just think about how much is going on with the characters that I saw, like the whole jewelry caper, that if you were not following the secretary, you were probably not privy to that happening at all. I wonder, like somebody who was following the Lady in Red as their principal character, she would probably feel very much like the main character in her own story to that audience.
Fair. Yeah.
And so I do feel like there are significant gaps that just simply by virtue of not following this character and that character, we have not seen. And I'm not saying the story was lacking. I think by the end, we even just with our, before comparing notes like this, we had a good sense of the main large storylines. But yeah, I wonder, when did the other man get into that dress? The audience that was following them would know exactly when that happened, but we don't. And I just had this interesting moment passing them in the hallway, like, oh, you're wearing a dress now. I wonder what that means. Anyway.
And I wonder too, like I never got to go into the kitchen. Like the host never goes to the kitchen area, but like the hostess probably does, because I also like remember anytime we didn't see the hostess, like if she was in the choreographed bit, obviously she was in our storyline, and then there was like a moment where she passes the host on the staircase, but that's it. That's all I ever see of her. So I'm like, oh, she probably went to the kitchen at some point and like checked on the food and maybe did a little bit there. Like,
yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like I knew that the host and hostess must be important characters by virtue of, like, we're in their home and they feel significant. And also something I think I forgot to mention, I alluded to this both in the previous episode and in this one, that while the wedding dress sequence was happening in the bedroom scene, that was when I looked out the window and saw the outdoor scene that you saw, because I was just able to notice that there's people out there, what's happening, and I didn't miss a lot of the wedding dress dance to be able to see that, them two is having relations out there, which I was glad I got to see, because I had no interaction with the host in any of my core scenes, or the other man for that matter, so seeing that, okay, I have a handle on what's happening between the two of them, and seeing the opening scene gave me a sense of, okay, you're married to her, and the Lady in Red was your date to this party, that I could infer what some of the drama and tension might have been just because of the glimpses of it that I was able to get out the window. But otherwise, the hostess as a character meant very little to me. I knew from the opening scene that she was the favorite sister, but she did not interact, which I will say, this not really a critique, but just like a minor thing I'm thinking about, is that the final moment that we're left with, that we'll talk more about this scene of her basically saying, get out of my house. I felt like I was missing some important context for, well, what has been happening with you? What is your journey? Like, I get that this has been a high tension night for everyone, but I would have liked to maybe have had more interaction with you to really feel the weight of this
Mm,
final moment. But, you know, this is the nature of the immersive experience and the
yeah.
specific trajectories that we are sent on.
I think also just seeing it as like a broad stroke statement of like, think of how many women back in that day of like, get the frick out of my house. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to put on another dinner party. It's all so fake. We're all dying inside. We all hate our lives potentially. Everything's fake. Get out. Like,
Mhm.
before I go wipe off today's makeup, quickly put on tomorrow's makeup and go to sleep so that my husband can wake up the next morning with a full fresh makeup. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
like, but I guess, yeah. So let's kind of get into dinner
Let's talk about
served.
dinner. Yeah.
Yeah. So, right. So we all get sort of funneled into this giant banquet hall dining thing. Not giant, but just like a whole,
Yeah.
basically the whole half of the upper level of the house. And the spectators are all on like one half, and the table is extended, but like our half of the table is just kind of like set deck.
Mhm.
There's like the napkins and plates and cups, but just to kind of set the scene, which you kind of clue into quite quickly. And then the other half of the table where you're watching is where all of our characters are coming to dinner. And each kind of comes in at like a certain time, and almost instantly, it's funny. I thought I was like, okay, we're gonna get like a little, like not necessarily a speaking scene, but like a scene where like they're doing the stereotypical like passing of this dinner, blah, 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 blah. But no, it's like it was like almost instantly. If you were following one track, you got to the core gut punch of the track you didn't see, and then vice versa. Like it was through a choreographed moment that was repeated. So for my track to kind of let Ryan's group or people know, mine actually came second, but actually I'll reverse it. Sorry.
Sure.
For my brain to get caught up with Ryan's track, um, the favorite is the last to show up, and he's like all disheveled hair and his like stuff's everywhere, and everyone kind of like puts their attention on him. And then who comes shows up after that is the secretary. So it's like,
Well,
oh,
can,
they had
can
a
I
little
add,
tiff.
can I add something to that?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
simply by virtue of where you were standing in
Yeah.
that final dining room scene, you couldn't see something that I could see, and
Oh,
which is that out the door that we came in through was the favorite and the secretary making out up against the doorpost.
oh my God.
So if he looked disheveled and she looked discombobulated, I could see from where I was standing that they were
But they were
mid-dalliance.
canoodling.
And
Lovely.
that's why they were the last ones to show up. And I imagine if I could see it, the other characters could probably also see it. The wife kind of was like going around the room and like, have you seen where is he? She's like looking out
Yes,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
windows,
yeah.
and like I kind of wanted to be like over there, but I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't direct her attention to what's happening. I have my loyalty to the secretary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then the wife, yes, is onto them, and instantly she kind of takes control, and this beautiful choreography of, again, she's been drinking. And again, I didn't really get to see much of this character throughout the whole story. So right now it's like, okay, cool. Like a kid in a candy shop, right? Of like, look at this new piece of candy I've never seen before. And she was gonna walk forward regardless, and the other characters kind of pushing chairs to kind of create a pathway for her to walk on so that she doesn't
Yeah.
fall. And then she just basically calls them both out and actually brings their heads together and makes them kiss in front of everyone. And it just was a huge, like, if you had like a big paint bucket and this like pristine 50s, 60s canvas and just splattered like
Yeah.
etiquette, you're out of here, decorum, you're out of here. Like it was just this grotesque, like, this is going to be my swear word. Fuck it. Like, fuck you, blah, 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 blah. So that was like a lovely, like, just again, for someone who didn't really get a scope into that track, it just reified for me, like, okay, yep, those two had something going on. The wife wasn't happy with it. She outed to this pristine dinner party. And then very quickly, kind of, again, for Ryan to get intel about what I had watched, you have the hostess sort of start pushing the other man to the center of the room, and then the matriarch pushing the hostess, her son, to the host, sorry, her son, to the middle of the room. And you think, oh my gosh, they're both going to make these characters kiss. But then slowly the other man and the host are kind of like turn so that they just hit back to back. And there's this paused moment of like, we thought we were probably going to see these two like characters kiss, similar to what we just saw. But instead it was like they were back to back. And then the whole company starts like looking towards us and laughing, like almost like, oh, they couldn't be, or like whatever. So again, taking out your paint bucket and being like, oh, this is blasphemous. This wouldn't happen. And, or like,
We've
you
all
know,
seen
like
it happen, though.
we've all seen it happen, but like, oh, it's okay, it's okay. So then that ends up kind of being the theme of the dinner, is like these raucous moments, like of like the chef, like picking up the maid and throwing her on the table, or like a choreography between the host and hostess of them like not understanding each other. These like raucous, like rip off the skin innards were sort of seen of all these characters, and then like a big laughter happens, and then like we go back to just doing a dinner party, and then like collectively they're all like banging their heads on like a chair or a wall or something, and then they laugh about it and it's fine. It was like ladies who lunch meets like screamo mosh pit, like just like anarchy up the wazoo. Like it was astonishing. And just to see like the dynamic shifts in like the high status versus low status, and to the point where like as specific as anything the hostess would do, the matriarch would make sure that she would step in front of the table closer to us and do the same motion. And so you had that mother-in-law daughter-in-law feud.
Symmetry kind of.
Yeah. So do you want to add to the table?
I don't know. You're doing a good job of describing it, and by this point, we all had the same experience. Me approaching this scene through the having followed the lens of the secretary, I was very happy to be positioned where I was, where I could see the canoodling happening in the hall. And I imagine that was deliberate, that the secretary's audience was brought into the room in a way that would allow us to see that, because it is the continuation of our story. Not that anything new is happening, as far as we've seen this dalliance happen a lot throughout this, but knowing that is happening immediately before both of their late entrance into the scene. And like we've seen so much of the feuding tensions between the wife and the secretary, especially in that very violent scene between them that happened prior. So the final payoff of the squishing their faces together. Part of me kind of wondered when we got to this point that for audiences that didn't get to see the fight scene and then the kitchen scene, I wonder, like, to me, it didn't necessarily have the big oomph. Like, it's still very much like it's disrupting the dinner party, splash the paint, like you said. But we'd already seen these two characters duke it out in this way. And the kitchen scene where they're polishing silverware and dancing limbo together, it kind of felt like they'd already reconciled by this point. So for the other audiences, I'm like, ooh, this feels like the big revelation that there's an affair happening. But for us, it kind of felt like, oh, well, we've already seen the resolution to this. But what I kind of, the switch I flipped in my head is that she never really got to confront her husband about it.
Yeah.
So it's more about embarrassing him in front of everybody at his big dinner than it is about being like, you are the other woman who's messing with my husband, because it wasn't, by this point in the story, from our perspective, it's no longer about that. And so that was the special insight that my journey through the story could bring into that final moment that I think is helpful. Yeah, in terms of the scenes or the parts of the scene that were happening between the other characters, and I guess the host in particular, to deal with your storyline, I was very happy that I had seen the outdoor escapades, regardless of whether I was supposed to, because that did give me a lot of context for what was going on there. But I had no context for what the matriarch or the hostess meant in this story. The hostess, I could kind of at least understand that it's her husband who is involved in this affair.
Mm-hmm.
But so I could see the stakes she had in it, but as a character, I didn't know what she had been through or what brought her to this stage. And the matriarch, I wasn't even sure whose mom she was necessarily,
Right.
based on how little I had seen her throughout my journey. So yeah, but what I think is really nice about all of this, the whole, fragmenting your audience in this way, is that it's kind of like life. You can
Mm-hmm.
only see the versions of the story that you see, and you aren't
Yep.
privy to what other people are bringing to. It's hard to walk a mile in their shoes when you have no idea what they've been through, and you are maybe rooting for a character that you have a special stake in, but from another person's perspective, they're the villain of the story. And I
Yeah.
think that's very clear with my character being the secretary, who is really, one, the other woman who is disrupting this marriage, and two, probably a thief who's really just playing all of them, but then three, also has her own emotional arc here where she's, maybe genuinely loves this person and feels bad about all the thievery that's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, like there's just so much layers. If I could have that many layers with one character, I could only imagine
I know.
the vast network of dramaturgical character motivations, heel turns that had to be choreographed, literally in the case of dance, but metaphorically choreographed, of the grand ballet of keeping all of these characters making
Yep.
sense. It's hard enough to write one very good farce where you have something going on with each of these characters, but to write it in a way where you don't even get to see what's going on with
Mm-hmm.
all the characters is a whole new level of art, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and also to like have it be structured like you're following one character, but then to also allow the layers of each character be up to each audience's experience and perspective of that character. Like you just said, like, you didn't necessarily know that the matriarch was the host's mother, but at the end of the day, it was just the character's just called the matriarch. And I look back and I'm like, right, they were the matriarchal figure for the host in that duet I saw on my track. But coming to the dinner is served, she could just be a stereotypical matriarch. It could have been the hostess's mom. It could have been the favorite. It could have been the wife of the father who just passed the company to her son. Like there's just so many. And then just going back to the wedding dress, like, yeah, that scene could have been like, friends, let's transfix our imaginations and pretend we're in the favorite's house, even though we literally know the dinner is going to be served at the favorite's sister's house. So you being like, I just took that dress moment as kind of being, this is the wife's wedding dress. But also, it could just be a wedding dress. It could have been the hostess's wedding dress, which that's also some like layered subversion as well of like the secretary getting her hands on the favorite sister's wedding dress and then just being the image of a wedding dress tipping the wife off. Like to allow there to be such specificity for the performer to create their own trajectory in the story, but then have it have so much accessibility to the spectators watching that, like, it's up to their own brains of deciding what's a symbolism for what or who is to what, like even like I never saw the hostess and the other man interact at all in my trajectory, but like when the other man and the host were pushed together at the dinner is served and the hostess was the one pushing the other man, I instantly was like, oh my goodness, I bet you they're trapped. I bet you they had a running in with each other and confronted each other through dance or like exposed each other in different ways. And that, how awesome is that? Of like, I feel like very rarely we see in media, like, we always see the person having an affair and their lover and the person having the affair and their partner, but very rarely do you see the lover and the partner that is being cheated on have kind of like a dance with each other,
And the fact that the hostess, was the one pushing the other man towards her husband in that final scene. Something must have happened in there where maybe she became okay with this relationship, and she understands that you can't help who you are, even though it's the 60s and we don't have the best sociological comprehension of the broad range of queerness, that it's still understanding that this is for the best. You two should be together. And that's really, just very well handled, all of this. And
Oh my goodness, yeah.
I would love to see this show 8 different times and get every single character's perspective. And even then, I feel like
Absolutely.
there's still things that would be missed or not fully grasped because it's just such a complex network of individual people, motivations, ideas that finally come together at this grand dinner.
Yeah, I hope this piece gets more legs. And even I would, like I said, like Ryan just said, I would love to be in this story and immerse myself alongside another character. But even if this, story's chapters are closed, please, Toast for Dan, tell us that you are doing more immersive dance theater, because it is astonishing. And I mentioned this in the last episode too. It's such a sense of community for the audience members coming to. Like, we entered this space, everyone was keen and excited to be on this immersive dance theater experience. And Ryan and I met some super cool people chatting before and after the piece. And yeah, it's just a wonderful ambiance created, and it's storytelling to a next level. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. You're here.
So that was your bonus duet review of Dinner is Served by Toast for Dance, which happened at the Campbell House Museum here in Toronto. Again, choreographed and directed by Kristen Carcone, Ross Wirtanen, and Clinton Edward coming on as assistant choreographer and director as well. And we mentioned many of the performers throughout, but I just want to do a blanket congratulations, bravo, brava to all of the performers, all of the stagehands, all of the designers, all of the technical elements that came to create this pure masterpiece. Definitely something Ryan and I will be chatting at for eons. And yeah, we had a splendid time, to say the least. So yeah, at this point, I guess we'll do our sign-offs as per usual. So Ryan, what do you got for us?
Yeah, so no, again, as I said in the previous one, no need to follow me personally, but if you like my theater opinions, as you've just heard here, by all means, you can follow Cup of Hemlock Theatre. That's where all of these thoughts tend to live. If you like what we do at the Cup, of course, that's the best place, is to follow us. We're at COH Theater on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are Cup of Hemlock Theater on YouTube, where you might be watching this right now, or Cup of Hemlock Theater podcast in all the podcast places where you might be listening to this right now. Like, share, subscribe, follow, leave a comment if you want. We're always happy to hear from people to keep these theater enthusiasm discussions going. How about you, Jill? Where can people find and follow you?
Yes, if you'd like to keep up with me, my artist Instagram account is jillian.robinson96. Got some super awesome projects down the line for 2023, so keep your eyes and ears peeled there. And as per usual, probably post some covers of tunes, maybe some 60s tunes inspired by this piece. But yeah, that's it for me. So as per usual, everyone, stay healthy, stay hydrated, stay kind to one another and to yourself. Dance, get out there and dance if you wanna. Hey. Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in as always, and we will catch you on the next episode of The Cup.